Just over a year ago, myself and a few fellow seminarians had the pleasure of meeting a famous American movie actor and celebrity, Mr. T. Our encounter came about through an event held at one of the locations we had been volunteering our time at in Chicago. Mr. T was kind enough to show up and interact not only with the people we were serving, but also with us, shaking our hands, taking pictures, sharing stories, even taking some time to pray with us. To this day, this is my only experience of meeting anyone who would be considered a celebrity or a person of any notable fame. And while it would be normal, perhaps even healthy, to cherish this memory of meeting a famous actor and just move on with my life, my overly analytical, philosophically poisoned mind can't simply just let this event rest, and so that's why this video is being made. What in particular shook myself and a few others was partly influenced by a philosophy of a French thinker named Emanuel Levinas, along with our own musings. To myself and a few other seminarians that day, something extremely strange had occurred, perhaps without us even noticing it. It was as if something had shifted in our perspective, all thanks to, I don't know, let's call it the event of tea. To be serious, though, what do I mean by this? Well, to understand the event of meeting someone like Mr. T, we have to go back to who he was, at least within my perception, prior to meeting in person. I was familiar with Mr. T through his acting career, as well as his brief involvement in pro wrestling. I had watched him in Rocky III and remember his really strange Mohawk grenade advertisements for World of Warcraft, but this in totality was the knowledge I had of him. After meeting Mr. T, I had a few new things I knew about him. I learned he was a Christian, that he was raised in Chicago, and that he had a soft spot in his heart for his mother. This accumulation of various facts may be useful when describing Mr. T, but it does not contain the totality of an other that I had experienced upon meeting in person. You see, prior to having met, Mr. T could only be a character within my mind that I had given attributes to, thought about briefly, and then sequestered off in what I will call the area of an extra other. His existence was implied through experiential evidence, such as watching him in his movies or reading an article about him, but never in such a way that required a responsibility or response from myself. Now, having met the man, he can no longer belong to that world of the extra other. He can no longer be categorized as famous movie star Mr. T from television. He has taken on the role of a truly other, capital O. What do I mean when I say the word extra other? It's that sensation of the knowledge of a person, but never actually knowing them. It's the stereotypical character, but not the total person. It is the presumed existence, but never the demanded subject of love. In less vague, poetic, nonsensical terms, I mean to say that prior to meeting Mr. T, he could only vaguely exist within a department of my mind that was reserved for former presidents, famous sports players, and other people I had heard of, but never really experienced. And there is a haunting twist to this category, though usually not intentional. Prior to meeting Mr. T, my extra other of him in some way did violence to him. Now, I don't mean I could take him in a fight or hurt him in any way. Just look at this man. I mean that for a brief time I was able to live in a complacency. Mr. T was a far-off figment, obscure, not a real person for whom I'm responsible for. Having met him, perhaps for the only time in my life, I could no longer authentically return to the state of just treating him as an extra other. Mr. T must be a person to me. He must exist. And yes, I am responsible for him now. Now, I keep saying the word responsible, and to explain what that even means probably is a completely separate video in itself. But for our purposes, I'll narrow it down. My encounter has caused a responsibility of love, a call to me to love, a commandment of sorts. I can reject this call by simply brushing off my encounter with Mr. T and returning to the world where he's just the guy who played Clubber Lang. But this brushing off would be inauthentic to what I now know, to what the face of the man has compelled me to recognize, even for an instant, that Mr. T truly is an other. So in this moment, something profound has happened. It was not that I now have this cool celebrity story to brag to all my friends about, but rather, someone has passed through a horizon where they now exist for the first time honestly and authentically, totally beyond myself, but given to myself. I must therefore see Mr. T beyond my presupposed knowledge, nourished by fogged mirrors and television mediums. I had an authentic encounter, and thus a shift in perception, and now an ethical obligation. This is not to say that prior to meeting Mr. T, I had no ethical obligation at all, but rather I was able to bracket this off as someone who was, but not met, and therefore unresponsible. Upon meeting, however, Mr. T has to be met, he has to be encountered, and I cannot push aside my duty to him as easily as I could before. He is no longer a hypothetical, but a grounded reality with a now visible moral call that commands me. So, what should we take away from this example, however silly it may seem? I'd like to leave you, the viewer, with a few questions to ponder. Hopefully, these will be springboards for discussion and further thought of some kind. What is it like to meet someone that you have heard of, but you have never actually met up until then? What is the difference between a person that you can imagine and a person that you have experienced? Do you treat, even if only intellectually, people you haven't met differently than people you have? What does it mean to be responsible for someone? Can our degree of responsibility to others change? What does it mean to experience someone else? Thank you for watching this video. Want more pseudo-philosophical videos all written at 1 o'clock in the morning? Subscribe to this channel.